I want to always start off a discussion like this with an understanding of games and where games fit in with people. So my first question always is, who thinks this is going to be the absolute most fun thing they've done today? I mean, for me, definitely. This is that's great. That's fantastic. How do you think this is going to compare to, say, the best movie you've watched lately, the best television show you saw? Who thinks this is going to beat that situation? Yeah, I didn't do so well on that one. Okay. My final question is, this is tough for some of us to think back, but who wants to go back to high school? I mean, tomorrow we'll send you back, and you'll be in class all day. There'll be homework. It'll be really fun, right? I mean, there'll be all these teachers who tell you what to do, and you get to listen to what they say. Who's ready to go back to high school? Not a hand. It's disappointing because I keep sending my son to high school every day, and he keeps telling me, "You're killing me." I mean, why are you sending me off to high school? He doesn't really say that. He just says, "When do I get to play games? When can I come home and play games?" Yeah, sure, he does ultimate frisbee and everything else, but what he wants to do is play games with his friends. He has a great time. I don't know, how many people have a teenager at home who loves games? Nobody? How many people have a teenager at home? That would be the first question. Okay, so that's part of the problem. Well, if you have a teenager at home, there's probably a 90% chance that they love games. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. So keep in mind the data I just gave you. So, okay, maybe this is going to be your exciting moment of the day. It probably isn't going to compete with the best movie you've ever watched, and you don't want to go back to high school. Okay, so now put yourself in the place of one of those teenagers. How excited are they going to be when we start throwing them into lecture halls in medical school and say, this is going to be really exciting? They're just not going to buy it. That's the crux of this talk, is to say, what can we do to engage these millennials as they continue through medical school, as they follow their careers? What are we going to do to make them feel like, this is exciting, this is fun, this is engaging, I'm learning a lot? And I can guarantee you that if you talk to a 14, 15, 16-year-old about games, they'll tell you they're learning a lot. They're not learning content. They're learning cooperation. They're learning how to deal with other people. They're learning how to win. They're learning how to lose. They're learning a ton of things in addition to the whole eye-hand coordination, 3D mapping, all kinds of other benefits. They want to keep learning that. They don't want that to go away, but they want us to add on the medical skills and content. I'm Brad Tanner. I'm a psychiatrist by training. I decided early on that actually I love technology and I love what technology can do. So I started a small company called Clinical Tools, and that's what I do full time. I'm not here to tell you about clinical tools, but that's how I earn my money. And we right now do online training for medical school, and we are moving into the game space, but I'm not here to tell you about our games. I'm here to tell you about why I think games add a lot of value. We have two other wonderful people here, and they will introduce themselves. I have one final set of questions to guide them. I just gave a talk at the East Coast Game Conference, which is a joy because it means the entire audience is full of gamers. So I asked these questions to them, basically being facetious because I knew what the answers would be. But who has played a game, say, in the last week? Some kind of game. I can tell you that in the East Coast Game Conference, there all the hands were up. Who feels like games are sort of adding value to medical student education? Like, this is really a great idea. It's hard because the lights are in my eyes here. So, okay. Well, hopefully I'll get some more hands near the end. That's very helpful. If you were to rate your enthusiasm, we'll start with the top. So the people who are really enthusiastic about the value of games. So I'm very enthusiastic about games. I think they're a fantastic solution for medical education. Not so many. Who thinks, yeah, maybe they could be of some value? All right, we're getting there. And then who thinks, absolutely not, this is a waste of time. When can I get out of this stupid talk? Because this is a waste of my time. That's always the challenge. You want to pick your audience for the folks who really aren't interested. So without further ado, we'll go on to the first set of slides, and then we'll go to the second set of slides, and then we're going to open it up to a panel discussion. I want you all to participate in that. If you feel like our questions are not terribly insightful, then feel free to say, hey, I have a question. I think there's a microphone here that we can give out to people. So you can raise the questions to us. We'll do our best to answer it. If you don't have any questions, then we have our own. So.
Okay. Wonderful. My name is Deborah Lieberman, and I direct the Center for Digital Games Research at UC Santa Barbara. And before that, I was a director of a national program called Health Games Research, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in 2007. And then they gave us a series of grants after that. So I've been working with them almost ever since, providing scientific leadership in the health games area to really find where the research evidence it can be applied to the design of games that are going to be effective with patients and with clinicians in terms of learning, behavior change, attitude change as well, and motivations. My PhD is from Stanford, so it's like coming home. I have a PhD in communication research. So I'm a social scientist, very interested in processes of learning and behavior change with digital media and games. I started working with the Sesame Street researchers at Harvard back in the early 70s when Sesame Street was fairly new. And I kind of followed the trajectory of new media as it developed. By the 1980s, I was working on children's learning software like Reader Rabbit. And in the early 90s, right here in Mountain View, there was a small company that hired me as VP of Research to do something that they thought was kind of a neat idea. What about if we took console video games and designed them for health behavior change? And they said, we want you to come work with us and make it work. And for me, that was the most exciting job opportunity of all that I had at the time. So we were trying to figure out, how do you map onto video games all that we know about behavior change, health promotion, media and learning, and so forth. So it's a confluence of many different fields. So what I'm going to do for the next 10 minutes or so is take you on a quick tour of why games are powerful environments for learning. You're a very sophisticated audience. This will just be a refresher, and I'm going to let pictures speak 1,000 words. And then I'm going to talk about some actual games in terms of delivery of care and in terms of training of clinicians. So it'll follow a path toward defining what a game is and why games are powerful, and then looking at games for delivery of care and clinical training. So first of all, this is a debatable topic, and if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear it. But what I've done is distilled down to its essence what I think a game is. First of all, any kind of digital game can use digital media and associated tools that we already use. It can be websites, it could be virtual reality, it could be augmented reality, it could be robots. Anything that we use for communication or to disseminate ideas or to interact with, we can also apply a game to that media mix. And what distinguishes a game from other media is that it involves challenge to reach a goal. It's a rule-based activity that involves challenge to reach a goal. And it also provides feedback on your progress toward that goal. And all of those component pieces are very important because, as you know, if you've ever played a game or you've even just played sports or anything, it doesn't have to be digital, the desire to win orients your attention and your motivation. And you'll learn and rehearse and practice anything in order to win. And I am a strong advocate of adding game-like experiences into our media. It doesn't have to just be, here's a game and here's a website, but mix it up a little bit and add some challenges to reach a goal, which I think make it for fun and rivet the attention. And games are experiential, and they engage our thoughts and emotions. Some of them have narrative and are story-based, and we get involved in a fantasy world, perhaps. And others might be more intellectual or, It could be a puzzle game or some kind of a mathematical game or a quiz, not as narrative, but it's testing other things about us. So they're powerful environments for learning. And they engage us. They are really very similar to hands-on learning. The research shows that media worlds are very real to us. We respond to them and we learn from them as if we were really there. You know, our hands are on. So a simulation of a patient in an emergency room. And if you've made decisions to care for that patient, you will have learned just as well as if, you know, you were working with a mannequin or a real patient. There is a reality to digital worlds that we shouldn't ignore. And of course, there's a cost savings to doing that. And there's a safety factor. You're not going to kill anybody when you're just starting out. And you can try things out and see how they work without being too worried about what the outcome could be. My fourth bullet point, nurturing, is one that interests me very much. That in these stories, we as a character can nurture other characters. And that is very compelling because we want to bring them back to life. We want to help them. And it brings out our empathy toward them and the triumph of helping them and saving them. And I'll tell you about some games in which that's done. Also, games can improve our self-concepts and our attitudes. And sometimes in a health-related game, that's really all we really want to get at. We want to maybe improve a player's sense of efficaciousness, their self-efficacy. Because oftentimes we know what kinds of behavior are needed to stay healthy, or to take care of a patient, or to accomplish climate change goals. But we think, well, I can't do that. I'm not capable. But if you rehearse skills in a game, then your self-efficacy increases. And then the floodgates open because then you'll actually enact the behavior. And I want to show you a series of pictures about just how powerful games can be and the very different aspects of games. Just look at the postures and the facial expressions of these players, and that really says more than I could ever say. So well-designed games are powerful. They have interactivity, and interactivity involves remembering in the exchange what was said previously and then reflecting that back. So I did some research on in a field of psychology that deals with conversational competence. What's fun about this field is you can go in so many different directions and it pertains to games. So what makes a competent conversationalist? It's someone who listens and who remembers what their partner has said and reflects that back in their comments. It grows in richness as you converse. Well, a game can be designed to do that too. It can remember every input from the player and provide a game state that reflects all the player's previous actions. And if you play a game that does that well, it's very satisfying. You feel like you have a sense of agency and power in the game. And the game knows who you are and has put you in a place that, in a sense, you've put yourself there because of all the decisions and actions you've taken. So the interactivity of games is very powerful, and I think that's one of the reasons why they can be so riveting. And I would argue that games are the most interactive media we have today. I mean, they're not making websites or interactive stories or anything else that I can think of that are as interactive by that definition as games are. Games are immersive. We lose ourselves in games. We lose our sense of where we really are, and we're in that world. And research has shown that the more immersed we are, the more likely we are to learn and to change our attitudes and to have outcomes in terms of health behaviors. The motivational aspects of games are powerful, and we will learn whatever it takes to win. And so you can give players challenges in which they have to learn a lot, and they will if they really want to win that game. And I want to make a point about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation as well. An extrinsic motivator is something like points or badges. You might have heard the term gamification, which involves taking a non-game activity and turning it into a game. Usually it involves the extrinsic motivators like points. And it's a controversial area because it can backfire, especially if the quote-unquote players did not buy into this idea. There are studies showing that when a company decides to gamify the job and kind of make the workers compete for how many sales calls they can make or how many customer calls they can take and that sort of thing, that productivity actually goes down. People feel like they're being manipulated and they resent it. And another aspect of gamification that is a negative side is someone might have some intrinsic motivation to learn a skill or to learn some content, but if they're gamified to learn it, they lose their sense of their intrinsic motivation. They say, oh, I was just doing this because I won money or I won points or I won airline miles or something like that, whatever it is. And they lose that sense that, I was doing this because I inherently wanted to learn it in the past. But games can actually bring you along to be intrinsically motivated because they can show you why it's important to learn about asthma and avoid your asthma triggers, right? Or learn about diabetes and take good care of your blood sugars. They're just fun to play and rewarding, and they're fun during play if they're well designed with little mini rewards along the way, and then in the long run, when you ultimately win the game, that's especially fun and motivating. There's a lot of research to show that games boost our knowledge and our skills, again, when well designed. There's evidence that our cognitive abilities can improve with games designed to do that, but it's usually focused only on the cognitive abilities that you're rehearsing again and again in the game. It's not going to suddenly make you neurologically more competent across the spectrum, but whatever it is you rehearse can be improved quite a bit. Games give feedback and chances to try again. A gamer expects to fail a lot in a game until they get better at it. And that's part of the challenge. If you don't fail at all, the game isn't fun. And now schools are starting to realize that courses can be designed that way, so that students are given challenges, and if they fail at first, that's perfectly fine. That's part of learning. It's not like you just learn, and then take a test and that's your grade, but it's a process. And games already do that and know that, and gamers like that. Rehearsal and success in a game can improve that self-efficacy I talked about. I love this picture. To me, that's the essence of the self-efficacy. She's, oh, I did it. The social aspects of games are wonderful. First of all, we are drawn to our social groups and will be motivated to just engage in physical activity or contests and the like if our friends are doing it. But also, we're competitive kinds of folks, and we like to compare ourselves to others. So social comparison can be a very strong driving force in games. But this is actually a Tuesday night bowling league around the country online in senior living homes, where they have their bowling shirts and their nicknames, their team names, and they are serious about this bowling. It's Wii Bowling. Intergenerational. Now we have grandma saying, kids, you want to play that game? It's grandma who wants to do it. And by the way, the fastest growing demographic in terms of hours of gameplay is people 60 and older. There's a lot more gameplay, especially now that interfaces are more intuitive and easier to use. I mean, we've got camera-based games now where you don't have to learn how to use a controller and that sort of thing. Games are being used in therapy very successfully. Here's a stroke victim in rehabilitation learning balance with a hula hoop game on the Wii balance board. And again, that motivation to win the game. We find that people who are doing physical therapy or rehab with games will work longer, will work harder, and will perceive less pain because what they're doing is they're so immersed in the game, they want to win it. So if you're supposed to be, wiping a dirty window with your hand in a camera-based game, you'll reach to the far corners of that window because you want to win. Whereas if the therapist just told you to reach your arm out and it's a little painful, you might not be willing to do that.
We should probably pause here to leave time.
Okay. All right. Let me. Okay. I've got a whole bunch more. Let me just skip to about 2 more. Okay. Let me just go through and just show some games that asthma, cancer, seeing yourself as an avatar, walking in someone else's shoes, Doctors are learning how to talk to patients about obesity to be effective, to get parents to help their kids avoid obesity. And one more slide. Here's bronchi for asthma. And I was supposed to talk about some research. This is a game we developed 25 years ago for type 1 diabetes that put children with type 1 diabetes through 4 simulated days, 3 meals, 3 snacks, measure your blood glucose, eat the right foods. And a clinical trial with Stanford doctors, Daryl Wilson was our medical advisor, and a 6-month clinical trial found, when we looked at urgent care and emergency visits related to diabetes, that our game showed a 77% reduction in urgent care and emergency visits related to diabetes, only among the kids who played our game and not an entertainment game. So I will leave it at that and go forward to my last slide to get Parvati ready. There's a mobile game that lets doctors practice virtual surgery. And thank you. Sorry I went so long. Yeah. And Parvati, now it's your turn.
Thank you. Thanks, Deborah.
Yes.
Okay, hello everybody. So I'm going to actually focus on a few specific points of interest because Deborah has given us a beautiful overview of the many ways in which games are being used. So I'm going to look at what is it makes it a game. She went through it herself. I'll give you my take on it. And what makes them really fun. And there are many reasons why they are fun, but they matter to us as educators when we're spending so much time and effort creating these games, because we're not natural-born game developers. So what makes it a game? So here's one game. Excuse me, I have to really take a pause, go back 1 second. And I need to introduce myself and do a disclaimer. I'm Parvati Dev. I'm currently CEO of SimTabs. It's a little company that develops simulation-based learning. I draw on that experience to talk about what I'm going to talk about, but I'm not plugging that. My background is actually academic. I was at Stanford for 18 years, running the Summit Lab, which was e-learning, game-based learning simulations. And before that, you might be amused to learn that I was so interested. I actually spent a lot of time doing 3D medical graphics, CT scans to anatomy, which sits in my background somewhere. Okay. So this is a game. This is a game we actually developed for Dr. Larry Chu, organizer of Medicine X Ed. And it was because when the residents start their very first month in anesthesia, they have to learn some very protocol-based things, like how do you set up an operating room in the morning? There's a certain set of things you have to do, and how do you not forget them? And so we made a game for him which took all the things you have to do, and you have to sort them in the correct order, and the physician will give you praise, will correct you, will give you feedback, and it actually becomes a lot of fun to do it. And you do it again and again because it's fast, and you learn it. Now, what made that learning task into a game? It's pretty obvious. What you can see, is there a pointer on this thing? No. Okay. So I just expanded the stuff that was on the right side. Introduce yourself to the staff, don a face mask, check if your anesthesia machine is functional. Those are the ones that I finished doing. Then prepare your airway tools. And then there's others that I still have to sort. Check that your suction is functional, prepare your IV boat. And I drag and drop these things and it becomes a game. So it's a sorting game. And the sorting game teaches you the correct steps. We would and then let me talk about this other game. This is an operating room. That person there is an anesthesiologist. There's a patient down there. He's putting the mask on. This is a very different kind of game. This is actually a very critical situation, which is being developed by members of the Anesthesia Society, and they are going to actually make it available to their members for certification. Maintenance of certification. It's a high-stakes game. And inside of it, there is a complete physiology model. This is developed by one of the partners in this whole thing. And there's a physiology model where the patient gets better or worse. This anesthesiologist, by controlling the medications, the fluids, the blood that's being put in, the oxygen, can keep this person in a sort of a dynamic stability where they're not failing. And this is really a crisis, a blood loss situation where this person is going down very fast and has to be kept up. That's also a game. It's not a game because we're necessarily scoring them or anything. It's an inherent game of, am I able to keep this person going, get them through the operation, and they come out safely? It's a simulation which, in the ability to achieve, becomes a game. So we do, and this just shows you, you make the whole thing very realistic, you have all the equipment, it really works. So they feel they're in the operating room. One does give them a score, as you can see. So you did this, you didn't do this, you missed that. Here's a score of 1. That was really important, so we give you a score of 3 on that one. But the way they're thinking is, did I do the tasks that were necessary to keep this patient safe? So the right side is the gamification. The left side is the game. And I like to keep these separate in our minds because both are valid, both can be done, and it depends on what you want to do, what you choose. So gamification is a process of, where the solving of the problem is mapped to a gaming method versus where the solving is the game. Now I want to talk about a few little things that I feel are kind of factors we should be considering in what engages people in a game. And the first one is microlearning. I've put them together on the left. Simulations plus microlearning plus a serious game together lead to engaged learners. Why do I say that? These are adult learners. Even people like I would, of an earlier generation, 20 minutes is about as much as people can focus. And then they really start losing it. And millennials have been shown to have a smaller attention span than that. So you've got to think of concepts of microlearning. 5 minutes is good. One learning objective in 5 minutes in one short game. Move the next learning objective into your next little game. Don't put the two together and make a 1 10-minute game. So that's one thing that we have discovered does improve engagement. I'm sure you all have heard about flow, Csikszentmihalyi's concept of that you have to balance the skill of the learner with the challenge of the task to keep the person within a zone where they are interested, feel able, and are learning all the time. If it's too easy, they're bored. If it's too difficult, they're anxious and they stop learning. So you keep them in the flow zone. This is something that actually one does not, when one's developing the game, it's very hard to implement this because you have to keep testing to see if your game is too easy or keep tuning that game. And most game developers of these huge games know this concept very well. And the last thing I want to talk about as far as engagement goes, and if you haven't tried virtual reality, it's very hard for me to express what this can do for you. And if you have tried it, you will know that the following things are true. In front of you, what you're seeing is somebody trying a VR game. In the middle, in the little screen, you can see that there's some kind of a first aid or first responder situation. And these people are looking up, looking down, reaching for things. So the first point about VR is I'm here with my headset, with my headphones, with my controllers, and as soon as I put those on, I have a world around me that's completely different from where I was. More importantly, you are not here. You're gone. My world is what it is. So somebody this morning gave me a great example of how to understand that. He was one of the speakers, Kunal Patel. And he said they were using this roller coaster VR game on the PlayStation. And so this person is on the roller coaster, it's going fast, and suddenly he grabs them. They freak out because that's it's like a ghost got you or something. It's so out of this world. So the sense of immersion and presence in the other world is one of the biggest characteristics of VR that I think we are going to find is going to really change how we develop these games. A second, more subtle aspect, I'm in this world, y'all are gone, there are other characters around me. The closer a character is, the more involved I am, the more I believe in them. If they're really close, my attention is solely on that person. And the further away they go, the more they move out of my area of interest. So proximity becomes a very big factor in the engagement in a VR world. And lastly, in VR, people have mentioned it before, because it's so real, because the characters are so close to you, you are with them. You're not watching them behind a glass window of a screen. The sense of empathy can be total. And it's very important for us when we create these games to understand we have that capability and to be very careful about that capability. It's very easy to jar and shock people to the point where it's very uncomfortable. But well done, empathic situations can create a very convincing learning setup. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. I'll pass it back to you. Thank you. Oh,
Whoop. So we only have about 12 minutes left. So I had a whole bunch of questions, but I want really to open it up to you all. And if you don't have questions, then I have some that I can come up with. But I think, especially because there's some doubters in the room, I think it might be good to bring up some questions from you all. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi there, I'm Eric Goldman from Holistic Primary Care. I guess this question is directed to Deborah, but any of you can, feel free. So this premise that people are motivated by wanting to win, is that universally true, or is there kind of like a bell curve of attitudes toward competition and winning, where like some people are highly motivated by that, whereas others could care less about winning or losing?
Yeah, it varies. It certainly does. And when you say competition, there tends to be a greater percentage of males who like to compete and females who like to achieve things rather than see who can win against one another. But the curves overlap quite a bit. But in terms of just winning a game, that's not the same as competition. It seems to be fairly universal if the end goal is something that grabs that person's interests. So you've got to, just like any good teacher will say, first of all, why we're learning what we're about to learn and get the students on board that they want to learn it. A good game does that too. It gets you really interested in what you're about to learn or practice, and then see if you can achieve it.
Yeah, I think it's important to define that there's different types of winning, and there's different player styles that have been well discussed in the literature. For some people, winning is destroying someone else, and we all know these people. Some of them end up in jail, and some of them are billionaires. So those people are in the game, and you have to be aware that they will do anything to, quote, win, including destroying everybody else, including basically ratting on their fellow teammates if that's going to help them win. So as you design a game, you have to be concerned about them. Other people, winning is having a huge social life and having lots of friends and having people say, hey, you're a member of the team. That's their definition of winning. Some people, see winning as helping someone else. Those are the caregiver people. So that's a win. So I think you're right. It's a universal but it's not a single universal.
Exactly.
It's I want to succeed, and this is how I want to succeed. I think the other thing literature supports is that and that's not true for the same person every time. In this game, you might want to, some kind of first-person shooter game, you might want to blow this person away. This other game, you're actually having a great time having a submarine and going down and working as a crew.
Yeah.
So one person isn't stuck in one of these, but I think it's a good framework to use. Another question? Oh, go ahead.
My name's Erin. I really appreciated all of the content you all presented. I found it really informative and engaging, and I agree with everything you've said. The question that I have is sort of two parts. One is, have you considered the opposite impact of this? So the negative effects that it might have on patients, for example, who are motivated or being challenged to win but don't? And then the second part of that is, how as patients can we work with our care teams to show the value of this? Because we're met with a ton of resistance to say we have to do things a certain way, when really, for me personally, I see a ton of opportunity and potential in this, but I can't get the care team to partner with me to show what the value of this is, both to myself and to others in improving the outcomes that we're trying to change.
So, yeah, everything can be put into a game format, for one thing. As for the first part of your question, I think that's where feedback comes in. If somebody's you want to keep them in the flow. So if they're having a hard time, you want to figure out how to reduce the challenge a little, give them feedback to get them into the flow, and then work them back up to more challenging situations. So that's a very personalized game approach. As far as the other one, where you want to sensitize your care team, I'm certain one can conceive of a game approach where they are in that situation where you see it. I mean, VR is actually very interesting for that, because first you walk in the caregiver's shoes and you see the situation. You're caring for a patient, now you turn it around, and now you're in the patient's shoes. And the physician said something, what did you hear? You heard something quite different. So I think you can really show that off through this kind of simulation.
Yeah. Also, evidence. Well, we say these games work, and one of the things we did with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation money was we made a health games database with publications, games, where you can find the game. It's not that you can link to the game directly from our database, but you can find out about games by searching by keyword, and then you can also search publications. And then there are articles that have been written that already show where the evidence is. So if you can show your doctors, these games really help people develop skills and rehearse them, or interact with other people with the same condition, and all those things. And then there are also hospitals that are using games and examples of where games have been used successfully. So those would be endorsers who I think your doctors would appreciate that. There are others who find that it works.
A final point, then we'll take another question. I think it's also important to remember that we're talking about medical students and medical education here, but of course the greater world uses games all the time and has no problem with games. So we can design games with a medical purpose for our patients, and I think that's an untapped resource. They have lots of time. They generally tend to be fairly interested in, supportive of games. We just need to start creating the games that our patients can play to address, confidence in terms of opioid addiction, address, stress management techniques. There's all kinds of games that could work. Right now, we tend to see games as these entertainment things. Yeah. I think that's narrow-minded. But anyway.
And also get patients to be involved in the design of games. It's very important.
We have like 5 minutes. Do we have any other questions?
Right there.
Oh.
So, Andrew Elder, Edinburgh, Scotland. I guess the ultimate purpose of all this is to improve patient care and not just make medical school more fun. Many tasks in medicine require a lot of concentration and application. So I was struck by what you said about millennial learners having a shorter attention span. If that really is the case, should we not be designing games that promote their application and a longer attention span rather than catering to the characteristics they've already got.
I think it's an excellent point, and considering I'm the one who brought that up, I'll counter that with the fact that my son can play a game for probably 7 hours straight, and if you look at game cons, people can play the entire weekend. They have no trouble with concentrating long term, and if you look at a millennial playing a game, it's by no means simple. I mean, if you and I picked up the controller, we would have lost in 3 seconds. But they're manipulating all kinds of data, saying the value and the strength of this.
Yeah.
There's people moving all the time. If it's a turn-based game, they're making these strategic decisions. What do I do if it's League of Legends before the next turn? And then the turn goes. It's kind of like Stratego. I was a doubter myself until I basically watched other people play games, and I recommend that to anybody. First of all, we all should probably play games more. I'm guilty that I don't play as much as I should. But if you just watch people, I think I agree with your concerns, and I had them all, and they've all gone away because I'm just really impressed by a well-designed game and its ability to fully engage the whole brain in a complicated task. I think it can be done.
So I think there are two parts to that. Indeed, attention span is limited, but you are able to do a lot of different things if they are broken up. So when we concentrate and learn a difficult concept, if we got stuck on one thing, I don't think we'll progress very well. We turn around and try to read some other way of understanding it. We try to find a diagram to help us understand it. That's how people of my generation, for sure, would learn. We did not. If the teacher kept saying the same 5-minute explanation again and again, I would never progress. They say it differently, and I think that's kind of where the microlearning comes in. That if they're not succeeding in that 5 minutes, there's no guarantee that they've learned the learning objective. You want to give it to them again in a different way until they achieve competence. But don't try to put 5 objectives into a 25-minute scenario or lecture or game. Try to break it up. And I think that's actually a good principle of teaching. But it brings in this, I think it brings to the fore the issue that we have in our lectures, for example, where we do a 50-minute lecture and we really try to get too much in without clearly giving them a chance to get each piece. And games allow us to do that.
Yes. Hi, I'm Denise Silber. I'm a digital health consultant. I've been involved in projects that have to do with serious games, gamification, variety of things. And what I'm often struck by is the problem of the goal. In games for entertainment, there are a lot of basic games that people could play forever, and then there are universes that are created, so there's a lot of diversity. And then you go into the medical world, and often the person who wants to create a game has too narrow a goal and maybe too narrow a budget, so that fits that goal. Mm-hmm. And then you can't do too much with it, and so it is a game that quickly gets stale, and you don't want to go on with it. There's an awful lot of that. It's very difficult, I think, to do things that can be as rich as chess or other things that have such an infinite number of scenarios unless you can broaden the scope of it. And I just really feel that a lot of the people who are making decisions about what budget should be applied in the medical world have too narrow an idea. Like, I want them to know to wash their hands, or I want them to know. It's not enough to create an exciting game. What do you think about that?
We actually talked about this earlier, and that's one of the frustrations.
Yeah.
is that people perceive of education as being very institution-based, and these are solutions that really cross borders. They cross country borders, and we need to change a lot of our attitudes about how to fund this stuff.
Yeah, I just did a workshop where we're co-creating the future of medical education, and in that we were looking at two kinds of things to do. And one of them was to facilitate the learning of respect, empathy, patience, and other human things for medical students. Now, you could create a fabulous game around such broad things, but not if it's teach them about blood pressure has to be 120/80,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yeah, you want to foster understanding and a basis for wanting to learn it and apply it and when and where and make decisions about it. And a broader based game, just has a richer possibility. And it's not always just teaching content. Sometimes it's, as I mentioned, self-efficacy. That might be a barrier to learning or to trying something out, or reducing the stigma of having a chronic condition, or just things like practice. Laparoscopic surgeons, studies have shown that if they play an action, fast-moving eye-hand coordination video game for about 20 minutes before they do surgery, they perform better. Their skills are more finely tuned. So there are many ways to get around learning and skill development beyond just content. So I'm with you on everything you said.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think our time is up, but I know that all three of us are pretty easy to find online. So sure, if you have any questions or other thoughts, feel free to Google, look at what's there, send us an email. We're all very responsive. We'd love to continue the conversation after today. So we appreciate everybody coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.